And we're live. It is Friday, February 13th. That's Friday the 13th, for those of you who did not notice. The year of our Lord 2026. It is 8:00 a.m. in Washington, D.C. And yesterday, I was trimming my hair, which I try to do now and then. And I was doing it with a buzzer kind of thing. But I'm an absent-minded guy. And, my mind was elsewhere, and I forgot to put on the little guard that makes it like out here instead of just rubbing against your scalp. And so the first stroke that I took uh, actually balded me on this side. And I realized that I was actually shaving my head by accident instead of merely trimming my head. And I had a moment of panic. And then I realized that this was actually a great thing about having white hair now, is that it's almost unnoticeable which part of this is bald and which part of it is, an eighth of an inch long. And if my hair were still black or brown, it would be very noticeable. Like, for example, my eyebrows, which are still brown on this side and gray or white on this side. You can really tell when I shave my eyebrows by accident, which I don't do very often. But when I shave my head by accident, it is actually remarkably hard to see. And so, for those of you who are considering coloring your hair to prevent the ravages of age, think about it. Think about the disadvantages. One of them will be that when you accidentally take a buzzer to your head and inadvertently shave your head, it'll be more noticeable if your hair is not its natural light color. Alicia Wanless is joining us, and because she's joining us mid-monologue, she's really confused about what the subject is. Folks, the sun is shining and glinting off of my bare scalp. The birds are chirping. It's going to be a great fucking day, and you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features is that, when I have a wardrobe malfunction or a grooming malfunction, I just tell you about it. And another one of the revolutionary features is that, sometimes um, uh, I wonder if my co-hosts actually want to come on the show, because I have spent all week negotiating with Alicia about what day she's going to come. And I always get the sense that, maybe she would rather if she weren't a co-host. Um, and I didn't have this claim on her early morning time, all of which is a 4-minute long-winded way of saying that we are not allowed to have fun anymore. But we are allowed to be joined by Alicia Wanless whenever she gets her technical issues sorted out, and to bombard her with things that she didn't necessarily need to know. In the meantime, folks, the phones are open. The Bob Mueller puppet is leaning on the pineapple. The cactuses are flanking the weird sunflower lady playing the saxophone. And what is on your all's mind this morning? I'll tell you what is on my mind. and it is the use of exclamation marks in judicial opinions. Uh, Judge Richard Leon yesterday issued an opinion um, uh, with 14 separate exclamation marks. And this was the opinion in the Mark Kelly, Pete Hegseth case. And yes, John Hawkinson correctly points out that there were italics as well to emphasize that Senator Kelly is a retired military officer. And I have complicated feelings about this excessive use of punctuation. So, on the one hand, it's really childish. And there's a sentence in that opinion that reads, horse feathers. That's literally the whole sentence. This is now the second opinion, high-profile opinion in a row that Judge Leon has issued that contains the sentence, please, which I really think, guys, if you're ever a federal judge and you're going to write a sentence that just says, please, you should spell it Puhlease, so it can be pronounced please. It's very distracting, and the entire lawfare Slack was, hello, Alicia.
Hello, Benjamin.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, my
Yep.
computer was revolting because I clearly have been at conferences all week and not using it.
Yeah, and computers get insulted if you do that.
Clearly, they have feelings. They need to be protected.
They do. How are you? Where
So,
are you?
did you like shave your eyebrow? What was that?
No, I was trimming my hair yesterday and I forgot to put the guard on the thing. And so I did one stroke and I realized I had actually like shaved a section of my head. Um, but the thing is, you can't see it because my hair and my scalp are so close to the same color anyway that um, that it is, and it was one of the ways I discovered the advantages of aging. And I did it, and I adjusted it a little bit to make it, but it worked just fine. I'm thinking maybe uh, there was a moment of panic, and then I realized that it was fine. Anyway, Judge Leon, too many exclamation marks. Don't, if you're writing a judicial opinion, you don't need a lot of exclamation marks. I know people are having trouble with the situation, but cut out the punctuation, Judge Leon. It's beneath you. Alicia, shirt action?
Oh, just CBC.
Excellent.
I almost bought a new shirt on this trip, just to wear on the show, but they didn't make small shirts. Or rather, your small size shirt is a large shirt.
Yeah, so I had shirt size issues when I was in Ukraine because in the United States, I wear very consistently a large shirt. Um, but then I go to Ukraine where there are all these barrel chested men with huge shoulders, and I wear a small. Um,
You wear
and
small in
in
Ukraine? I'm
you,
surprised.
yeah, no,
Not that you're not small, but I thought it would be the reverse. I thought this story was going somewhere else.
no, they are the men. They are barrel chested, huge shoulders, um, and um, and it's weird to go into a store and they look at you and say, small. Um, so
Hmm.
yeah,
Well, I went to like a basketball thing.
a basketball thing.
Yeah. The some of the players in the WNBA created this other thing called Unrivaled, where they play like 3-on-3 and 1-on-1. So the first of the 1-on-1 tournament was the other night here in Miami. But apparently, the clothes that people want to wear for basketball are They're big. They're big, and the shirts are cut like down here. My
Oh
friend tried to
yeah,
talk me into getting a child size shirt, which felt embarrassing.
yeah. That's not. I find it's one of those can't we standardize clothes size. I don't feel, again, I'm not American nationalist about this, that everybody should use our plugs or everybody should use, I certainly don't think everybody should use imperial measures. I don't think like uh I but and then time, of course, I've railed about, universal time before, but it just seems to me that there's like some
Are you
point
talking
in.
like the 24-hour clock? You can't
Yes,
handle the
we should
24-hour
we
clock?
should all be on Greenwich Mean Time, um, and um, and so that you don't have to change time zones when you get off an airplane. Um, and I just think we should standardize things. It's not that hard.
Yeah, well, two things. I put a link into this Unrivaled tournament, which is super cool if anybody likes basketball, because I believe women's sports should be supported. And the second thing is, when it comes to measurements, there's a Nate Bargatze sketch that just lives rent free in my head from Saturday Night Live about you people and your measurements.
Uh, you mean the one from the Revolutionary War?
Yes, where he plays George Washington.
It's pretty great. Um, all right, Alicia Wanless, what is on your mind these days?
How terrifying it's going to be to rent a car and drive out of Miami.
Yeah. Why is that terrifying? You know how
Well,
to
first, can we
drive.
just talk about Miami? Because it's weird.
I love Miami. Yes, let's talk about Miami.
Why do you love Miami?
Um, I love Miami because it is a genuinely bilingual city in the United States, because it has some of the best food in the United States, because it has a vibe that is completely different from anywhere else in the United States, and because it is uh, um, I just find it a very fun place to spend time.
Hmm. Did you know they have a street racing problem?
I have seen the street racing problem.
Hmm. And it
Um,
sounds like their cars lack mufflers. Like, is that a facet of the Kuzma thing falling apart? Was like Mexico or Canada producing the mufflers?
I think it is a function of the fact that people in Miami like to show off. They show off their clothes, they show off their lack of clothes, they show off their lack of mufflers, it's just a very showy culture. And
Do you know
I
that they do that at 1:30 and 2:30 and 3:30 and 4:30 and 5:30 in the morning?
I am aware, yes. Um, yeah, no, um it's not like a good place for low noise. Also,
Do you know
people,
that there's just like sections of the pavement on streets missing? Like entire, like massive rectangle chunks just like gone from the street. You're
that I was
driving and there's nothing there.
that I was less aware of, but I also like the prevalence of lizards. Um,
I
there
saw
are
one dead on the ground.
there are a
Apparently
lot of
they were falling from
lizards.
trees.
Was it cold?
Yeah, it was they had a cold snap, and so there was a whole big thing about iguanas falling from trees, and I
Yeah,
guess they think the
iguanas.
iguanas are pests.
Yeah, iguanas. First of all, I am pro iguana. Any iguanas that want to hang out in my neighborhood are welcome. But yeah, when it gets below a certain temperature, they do just go catatonic and fall out of the trees, which is very funny. Um, yeah, so why are you worried about driving out of Miami?
Because the people are insane. The driving here is insane.
Hmm.
And the honking. I don't know. I don't know. It's I took a rental car in a hotel that's like literally just turn right and you're on the highway kind of affair. So I'm hoping this goes okay. You were going to tell me about Ukraine, although somebody did want to talk about the bridge.
Uh, the bridge. Uh,
The
you've lost me.
I assume they want to talk about the bridge that we paid 100% for that
Oh,
joins our fine
in
countries.
Detroit, yeah, that we're refusing to open. What is the latest in on that?
I haven't heard, but I did hear the fact checking on our side that we tried to build it with you guys in partnership for many, many years. And I think around 2012, the Canadians had it and they're like, fuck this shit. We'll just pay for it. We'll just do this. And they paid it for it in full, but you still, Michigan owns half of it. And we also used American labor and products in it. And then Trump turned around and demanded it.
And
I guess it's like
the
a peace prize.
I think it has to do actually with the family that owns the other bridge. That the other bridge is
That's a privately owned bridge.
privately owned, and the family has assiduously lobbied against any other bridge. And I think it's more of a private corruption thing than an anti Canada thing, although the two obviously feed off of each other. Um, but
It
I
has
don't,
that added benefit.
right. I'm not sure I have much to say about the bridge except bad. Um, no, no, we shouldn't be treating our neighbors this way for either nationalistic bullshit reasons or for private corruption reasons in whatever percentage whatever, whatever balance they're both bad. Don't do that. Open the fucking bridge. Um, you know, it's, I think
I just think there's something wrong about private infrastructure being owned private like public any okay a bridge is to me public infrastructure. How can it could be privately owned? It doesn't. I know there's toll roads and stuff. I'm not a I think toll roads are problematic, although I will be using one today, although I hear it doesn't go very fast.
well, toll roads can be public, or, I mean, they can be public, right? There can be user fees on toll roads, but
Right.
I think this is a privately
But
owned bridge that a family
it
owns.
is. It
Um,
is. The other one,
yeah,
to be clear, not the one we paid for.
right. You guys built a public bridge, and I think it is not going to have a toll. And
We could
yeah,
ship mufflers down to Miami.
we could ship mufflers down to Miami. I want to say I ordered a uh, electric vehicle charger the other day, and I made a point of buying a Canadian uh, uh, EV charger by a company called Grizzly, and it showed up. And it had a big stamp on it that said proudly made in Ontario. And I thought, great. Um, and so, I want to encourage everybody, particularly on large purchases, think about where things are made and buy from, uh, you know, companies that are actually manufacturing things in parts of the world that you want us to have good relations with and that you want to support industry in. I have to say, I felt great about buying a uh, significant piece of hardware that was, you know, I, I haven't felt this good about a purchase since I bought all that Canadian hardwood. Um, so yeah, all right. Other than getting out of Miami and making it to the airport, what's on your mind these days, Alicia?
Mm. Uh, I don't know. I told you, you'll regret this. I'm quite tired. It's been 5 days of being talked at.
And has the so Alicia is at a Knight Foundation conference in Miami. How has the conference been?
I've been at three back-to-back events straight through this week, beginning on Sunday. So it's been a lot. It's a big sprawling conference. It's kind of neat because they mix many different participants. Like there were people from public libraries, media organizations. They also have academic researchers. Ben is conspicuously absent, although there were
I'm
people from
sorry, I was in
Lawfare.
Ukraine.
You got
I
home in time.
I didn't actually. But
It just was yesterday and today, like 2 days. You could have been here.
nope, I couldn't have. I have been uh reabsorbing my life after having been away for 2 weeks. Um
I see.
anyway, um now you're on your way home.
No, I'm driving up to see some family. I'm going up to north of Daytona Beach, so that's thus the drive. It felt like it didn't make sense
Ah,
to fly.
that's a long drive.
Well, depends. It's almost like sailing, from what I can tell in the Google estimations. I may or may not get there in 3 hours and change. I may get there in five. Is there
Right.
wind? Are there cars in my way?
Well, the thing about driving in Florida is that the roads are incredibly flat and incredibly straight. And you just point the car in the general right direction, and then you can, go to sleep or be, watch a movie or read a book, and you just kind of, every periodically check that you're not veering off the road, and you can go for 14 hours that way.
Well, my friend does drive back and forth from Canada because he's got a house in Tampa and they do it in 24 hours. I think that's insane. I'd fly that. That I'd fly. But one never knows if they'll get back here. So they choose adventures over comfort. I don't think flying to Orlando and then driving an hour is comfort either. Um, what's on my mind? Well, we're going to come back to Ukraine in a second. I've been analyzing the Canadian information environment ecosystem,
And
and
have you
that's
found it
interesting.
glorious or wanting?
I've found things that make me uncomfortable. Yes. Apparently, another one of our media conglomerates was bought out by an American organization entirely, not just three quarters, like Post Media, which is our largest newspaper conglomerate. But this one, Black Media Group, was bought out by Carpenter Media Group, which apparently has had some intervening in editorial on their other papers and has rapidly grown to become your fourth largest newspaper conglomerate in the US as well.
That's interesting. What is it? Carp?
Carpenter?
Carpenter,
Um,
sorry.
here. Uh, I don't know. It's like it came out of nowhere. People have been commenting on it in the US about how quickly it rose to start buying up local newspaper. But maybe about a year or two ago, I bought this Canadian one. And so I was looking into the Arctic, for example, and was disturbed to find out that they own a good chunk of the newspapers up there now.
That's interesting. Um,
And in
yeah,
Alberta, they're the second biggest, I think, after Post Media, which also bought up its own competition. So, like, it owns both the daily newspapers in Edmonton and Calgary.
yeah. I mean, I'm really troubled by the media ownership environment here too, um, and much more than I was even a year or two ago, where you could say, okay, it's a disaster at the lower levels, but you have these elite institutions that are doing okay. And now, the Washington Post employs fewer people in Kiev than Lawfare does. And, you know, I mean, the destruction of some of these institutions is really um, something fierce. And the only good news is the growth of kind of insurgent organizations like the Bulwark. But those are going to be for the long term and for the medium term anyway too small to support extreme local journalism or much overseas stuff. And so you have this really, I think, pretty treacherous environment that I don't really know what to do about.
Yeah, that I can understand that. I kind of struggled to see how you turn. Well, that's just it's dark, Ben. My as you know well, the case studies I have didn't look at who didn't get into a civil conflict in the end.
Right.
So my my only knowledge is when it goes into the conflict.
Right. And Andrew rightly points out in the chat that some of these questions come down to benevolent billionaires versus evil billionaires. And that's exactly right, except that, only a few years ago, we all would have called Bezos, with respect to the Post, one of the benevolent billionaires. He was investing a lot in it. He was making pretty wise decisions about important things. They were growing. And, and then he turns on a dime and starts vandalizing the organization either because he's gotten bored or because he doesn't want to lose that kind of money or because it's bad for him in his relationship with Trump to have an organization that's doing independent journalism for whatever reasons you might think. And then all of a sudden, and right now, Laurene Powell Jobs, who owns The Atlantic, is the most benevolent of the benevolent in the billionaires department. But, you know, how long does that last? And what happens when she's no longer among the living and that, gets inherited by some other um, person with the last name Jobs who's not so benevolent? It's a very unstable way to do business.
Yes, I would say this is the why it is important to have a public broadcaster that is, not always targeted. Because actually, that's another thing that I learned. There's a great article that if I could pull it up, I would bring it up for you that I came across recently. Um, Looking at again the Arctic, and because the power grids are pretty funky up there and they regularly have blackouts, anything that relies on the internet goes out. So the only reliable communication that always stays up no matter what happens is FM broadcast, CBC.
Mm.
And so it's a matter of security in places like this for sure. But in the south of Canada, you've got conservative politicians who are constantly going on about defund the CBC. But actually, when you were bringing up Bezos, my head was like, yeah, people used to think Bill Gates wasn't so bad. But then you have Epstein emails.
Yeah, although I do think you know, I do think we can separate people's personal conduct, which is sometimes awful, from their effects on the world. And I think, Bill Gates is whatever his relationship with uh, um, Epstein may have been, he's had some, like, there are a huge number of people who don't have malaria because of the Gates Foundation, right? There are a huge number of people. Like, I think you can separate somebody's philanthropy, and in Gates's case, the philanthropy has been extremely valuable, although not in the media space. Um, you look
Wanting to
horrified.
secretly give your wife medication to deal with the STD you think you've given her. I don't know. Um, what a time we
No, I
live
mean,
in.
I'm not in any way defending his personal conduct. I'm just saying his effect on the universe is not, he hasn't destroyed a media organization. If we're talking about the media ecosystem, Bill Gates, unlike Jeff Bezos, isn't part of the problem.
No, no, he's just part of a problem.
It's part of a
Tell me
different
about
problem.
Ukraine. How was the trip? Have you talked about it on the show?
I've talked about it a fair bit on the show, but I'm not sure I've talked about it at the. Uh, so I'm kind of, I don't know, the word that comes to mind is overwhelmed or verklempt by the whole thing. I It was an enormous amount of information in a fairly compressed time frame. I was there for 2 weeks. I was in Kiev, Odessa, Kharkiv, and Lviv, um, and um, I am really still processing it. I've I'm not sure I I'm very um it's a lot to take in. And there's a lot of it that you think you're aware of, and you are aware of it at some intellectual level, um, like the power situation. But there's something about seeing a whole vista of buildings at night, large buildings, all black, with just occasional windows lit up where there are batteries. That's, you know, nothing quite prepares you for that. And um, and then there's the the parts of it that you actually don't see or can't see at a distance, like um, the experience of constant air raid alerts and having no idea which ones to respond to and which ones to ignore, because you can't respond to all of them. They're too constant, and too many of them are, I wouldn't say trivial, but too many of them you have too high confidence that, oh, that's just a drone that's going to get shot down. It's never going to get anywhere near here. But then you also know that, well, a certain percentage of them do. And um, and so there's a very complicated relationship between risk assessment, fear, and normalcy that, we all price into our day-to-day lives very blithely in normal environments. Like, you're aware that when you're getting into a car, that's a riskier thing to do than getting onto a train. But you have certain risk pricing that you just do instinctively. Um, and this really interrupts that. Um, because, okay, how do you figure into your risk calculations just in living your life the fact that the streets are completely glazed with ice, so that you will slip and fall if you're not extremely careful, and
On
maybe
your laptop.
on your laptop, and also that there will be missile strikes somewhere in the city, and that will almost certainly not affect you, but might. Um, and um, and these are questions that you just never really have to think about under other circumstances. You just vanished.
I know, because I was cold, so I had to go get something to put on, and then
Oh,
I
okay.
was like, I'm here, I'm here. I haven't gone. I
Okay,
just
okay, okay. As
nobody
long as
needed to see me get up and have my old lady legs be like, oh, creak.
John Hawkinson, the laptop did not explode on an airplane, and is still being used. I will replace it. It's near its deathbed, but it's not. but it's still usable.
To be clear, did you think it was going to be exploding on the plane?
No, John Hawkinson did.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and anyway, um, I also met with a huge number of people who were uh, really inspiring, and you know, from people who are trying to think about uh, how to organize significant efforts to translate Ukrainian literature into English, to people who are organizing frontline defenses, to people who are training random people on flying point of view drones, right? I mean, it's a really quite diverse, to podcast producers, who are doing, trying to build indigenous media. Um, it's it's a remarkably the process of nation building, which is really what they're doing, right? Is a fascinating process to watch and to talk to people who are engaged in one way or another.
Yeah. That's something I used to look a lot at actually in undergrad too. You know, language engineering, darker sides of nationalism. I mean, you don't have to answer this here if you don't want to, but how did you get a beat on like what morale is like and where thoughts are at? I mean, I think it feels impossible that there would be a peace deal, but like what the Ukrainians would see as an acceptable peace deal?
I think there's a lot of diversity of opinion about that, actually.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
the um, there is a quite bitter but nonetheless real acknowledgement that they are not going to win on the battlefield in the short term if winning means taking back all the territory that is, within the sovereign uh, 1990 borders of Ukraine. They're not about to seize Crimea. They're not about to uh, take back everything they lost in 2014. And the real question on the table right now is how much more territory in Donetsk they're going to lose, um, which is happening slowly, and very incrementally, but they are losing territory right now. And they know this, and they know that I think if both sides would agree to a ceasefire in place, that would be advantageous to Ukraine, not disadvantageous, right? Um, so people are pretty realistic about that. Um, I think the red lines in a ceasefire slash peace agreement are they really don't want to and won't evacuate territory that they are currently holding, which is the primary
I
Russian
know. I
demand.
know.
Um, the second is that they are holding out for the best arrangement they can get in terms of U.S. security guarantees. And this is a very old sore spot in their relationship with the United States that dates back to the
They
Budapest Memorandum, and that has been greatly exacerbated by the fact that Donald Trump is deeply untrustworthy. And so you know, like imagine if you've watched what we've just done to Denmark and what we're currently doing to Canada, and you're Ukrainian, right? And you're the gold standard of something cool, something you want is a US security guarantee. And we're here trying to like steal Greenland. Um, and so I do think it makes it really complicated. But um, uh, fortunately or unfortunately for them, Putin is so intransigent that there's no opportunity for them to be the sticky wheel because Putin won't agree to anything even semi-reasonable. And so it never really quite forces the issue. Um, Morale is bad. Um, and, people are extremely tired. And the fact that it was really, really cold for like it has warmed up now to just around freezing, and that is a huge relief to a lot of people. But it was really cold, like dangerously, dangerously cold. And um and people's it wasn't just that their electricity and heating was out, it was also that their pipes were then
Yeah.
freezing so
Yeah.
that you don't have running water either. And that's a hell of a way to live, even apart from the fact that missiles keep coming in. So, there's a tendency in the West, and the Ukrainians have really encouraged this over the years to, talk about Ukrainian resilience and the plucky Ukrainians. And I- it's not all bullshit or anything, but like nobody actually wants to live that way. And it's a very like, um, the, the, it does convey a misimpression about how demoralizing this stuff is.
Yeah. Also, I think as something it endures like that and perhaps gets less attention because of all the other crazy things that continue to happen, it's also easy to forget. And not really have a good sense of that. Like if you haven't lived through it, it's hard to imagine. As it turns out, because it does feel like we have populations that have forgotten the horrors of the First and Second World Wars, such that we find ourselves back in this precarious world situation. This is not cheery. Okay,
Um, yeah, I mean, on the cheerier side,
you have
um,
cheerier.
yeah, no, there are some, uh, on the cheerier side, there's a lot of really cool conversations that are happening there. And, the what does a post-war governance arrangement look like conversation is actually a really cool one. And, they are thinking hard about how you design functioning democratic structures under stress and partial occupation of your territory. There's a lot of creative thinking that's going on. There's a lot of, um, uh, the young people there are amazing, and they're doing all kinds of crazy creative work from art stuff to like building little think tanks to uh, salons around candle lights because the power's out in the evenings. I mean, you do have a sense of the kind of intellectual ferment from which great things happen. And I do um, have a lot of admiration for that and found myself very wrapped up in the ambience of that stuff.
Michael worked there before the war, so he was there for 9 months or something, and I was going to school, so I could go and visit. One thing that he has always said, and I think this is also the case, like in Georgia and some of the other places around Russia, uh, that they're very innovative. Like there was something about them that there was like a drive and a lot of energy, like even before the war, that he thought was remarkable.
I think that's right. And there's a fascinating relationship between, so if you think about like high trust societies like Finland and Scandinavia, versus low trust societies, um,
And much
like
more diverse. Like Ukraine is diverse.
it's quite it's reasonably diverse.
I
It
mean,
does
compared
not
to Finland, it's like
compare to
crazily
Finland.
diverse.
But what we're a medium to low trust society. Um, but what's so interesting about Ukraine is that it's a very high trust society for certain purposes and very low trust for other purposes. So there's an enormous deficit of trust in government institutions, because a lot of them have tended to be corrupt. They've tended to be, uh, uh, you know, uh, service provision is not always wonderful. And on the other hand, there's an enormous amount of interpersonal trust. Um, you're not going to get robbed on the streets of Kiev. And you're not going to get, um, and if you slip and fall, somebody will come over and help you. There's a high degree of uh, interpersonal trust, that is really different from the way people talk about, including with total strangers. That's very different from the way people talk about remote institutions. And so the result is, you have these military units that have formed out of very local, um, territorial self-defense groups come together in this very informal way, and they have really close relations with the communities that they come from, and therefore become these very trusted units in a much larger institutional military that isn't particularly trusted. And so, like where people do and don't have trust is really interesting from a it's not like Finland where there's sort of a high trust in everything works, so why wouldn't you trust it? But it's also not like a low trust society where you store your money under a mattress and you don't trust your neighbors, right? It's a really complicated trust environment.
Yeah, that tracks. Um, I'd be curious to see too. I don't even know how to preface the future in Ukraine, but I hope the younger people manage to take the means of government at some point and clean it up.
Yes. One of the things that they have not done well is a party system. And so, the president's party is, I wouldn't say a cult of personality around Volodymyr Zelensky, but a cult of personality around Volodymyr Zelensky. There isn't a there are several opposition parties, but none of them is the opposition, right? There's no analog to the Democratic Party in the United States or the Tories in Canada or even the Bloc Québécois, right? The parties are relatively amorphous things that form and deform, um, situationally. And so, you know, who exactly represents what over time, is, other than some entities are more pro-Western and some are more pro-Moscow, although the latters are wholly discredited now. And so what really separates the politics is is a complicated question, and good good politics kind of requires stable choice over time between broad movements, right? And they don't really have that, and it's a problem. They've also suffered from the lack of elections over the last 6, 8 years, which has been forced upon them by the war, but they do have a certain amount of democratic stagnation as a result of it, and it will be a very healthy thing for them to have elections as soon as they can.
Well, I mean, coming out of 2014, they didn't really have much, like, in terms of civil society as we'd see it, um, at all. And that really developed after that first invasion. And then, of course, it wasn't long until this shit happened. So it's not like maybe it had enough time to develop such that it could deal with the rot that had been the post-Soviet government, which, I mean, like, so much of the corruption and everything else was just inherited from that order. So maybe once peace comes, that civil society that has developed in response to wars and tackling certain things may be more beneficial for reshaping how the country is governed.
I think that's right. And I also think, the war has answered decisively what had been the central fissure in Ukrainian society, which is, you know, are we a brotherly nation with Russia, or are we a Western country that has an enemy on our border, right? And that was, if you think about Ukraine up until 2014, this is the fundamental fissure. And the Revolution of Dignity mostly answers this question, but not entirely. There were still pro Moscow mayors in a bunch of cities, including Odessa. Um, and um, and now I think that question, there's nothing like being invaded
Right.
by the fraternal nation to answer that question. And I think just ask Canadians. Um, and um, and I think that question is answered, and with it, most, not all, but most of the language questions, uh, uh, most of the cultural questions, the answers kind of follow from that. But so then you have the question of, well, okay, what are you going to organize? What are you organizing politics around? And, is it anti-corruption? Is it EU integration? Is it
Mhm.
is it an Israeli style
Do you have to have a
security
vision?
set of security questions, right? Um, and the answer, of course, is some degree of all of them. But in what in what order of priority and with what flavor? And I think, a lot of that conversation is pretty stunted while the war is going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really it's really hard to imagine a future when the present is so bleak. Um,
Yeah,
Not related to this, but kind of because everything you were saying was reminding me of a certain chapter. Fun fact: a friend went to get my book yesterday, and Amazon recommends the V.E. Schwab alongside the book. And she was like, she thought this was very weird. So I have to credit everybody here for having to
that's
buy both.
that's really cool.
You
Speaking of
impacted
which,
Amazon's
Speaking of
algorithms.
which, reminder to all, Sunday, Tori Shockey on the Mara Book Club. The Her book, again, I can never remember which one's Huntington and which one is Shockey. The Soldier and the State, or The State and the Soldier, along with Phil Kay's book Redeployment. And I have some reading to do to catch up, to be ready for that conversation, because I did not get as much reading done on flights as I meant to. So join us Sunday evening. I believe it is at 6 o'clock. It is on the calendar. Um,
Are you still
so
doing the calendar?
yeah, the calendar is up to date. And uh, uh, so join us. We will talk about these two books then. So, Alicia, what are your um, uh, reform thoughts for Canadian media environment? What if you could snap your finger and somebody said to you, "But Alicia, we have to do something," and you were forced to do something now? Is there any obvious thing to do, or are we still too much in learning mode to figure out what we should do?
Um, so as you know, I look at it in different types of layers. So it's not always like just information content kind of level. I think there's some worrying things I'm seeing in terms of emergency management, emergency response, because so much of our traditional communications, like in Nova Scotia, for example, Bell Alliant took out all the copper wiring and put in fiber optics for the telephone. So when the electricity goes out in a storm, which it does, they had in last year, I think it was, or the year before in Nova Scotia, unplanned outages almost every day somewhere in that province in the year. Like it was really bad. So moving everything to something that is more requiring internet and backup power means that the communication systems go out. The cell towers, which they run the SMS and other alerts on, only have backup for like 4 to 6 hours, and there's no mandate from our regulator to have generator backups. So one is I would be quickly looking at backup power on stuff like that. Second is I would be heavily advocating CBC as a means for continued communications in blackouts like that. And to try to deconflict also the politicization of it, because I think that this is a stupid concept when we're facing all the things we're facing. I think I would be looking at local media, how not just like don't just fund it, but like how do you support perhaps even just independent journalists in places given the consolidation of our news media and lack of media. I'd also probably be looking at creating two types of national programs, which may not have immediate effect, but something along the lines of a youth program to provide experience and exposure across the country. So maybe it's kind of like a paid work program within the public service of anything that it is that you want to try to be in the future. One, to give kids work opportunities, because what we're seeing in Alberta is that the biggest percentage of people who are wanting to leave, according to surveys, is actually Gen Z and millennials. Um, and I suspect it's tied to the economic argument that they think they'll be better off because they're not getting opportunities. So that's one. And then the second part is I would probably take a more creative approach to what people are calling civil defense. I don't think it should really be defense, but this idea of creating programs that have people work together at a local level to be ready to solve problems. There is some evidence that this can lead to social cohesion and help societies respond better to disasters. But I also think that it could be beneficial in terms of rebuilding fissures in Canadian society. So, nothing big.
Yeah, so question. When you talk about, major investments in the CBC, uh, we obviously don't have anything like the CBC. Uh, you know, and that requires to have a CBC requires some political agreement about what truth is that is frankly vacant from, clearly absent from the US right now. Um, and I mean, like, I'm just serious. Like,
I
you
know.
have, and so my question is, how confident are you that Canadians agree enough about the nature of truth to have a national broadcaster that that a wide swath of opinion would actually want to invest in?
So right now, I mean, CBC's I don't know, trust rating, whatever you want to call it, isn't horribly bad. It's just bad in some demographics. Like it's actually got a really high trust rating in Quebec, in the French language version. But nationally, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it might be like 50 to 60% kind of thing. It's just very bad in conservative people who would likely vote conservative, and I would guess that it's probably pretty bad in Alberta, but we don't really do a lot of great down to provincial level granular statistics. That's a big gap that we have. So one is, I think I wouldn't, if I were, if I had a magic wand and Mark Carney called me tomorrow and said, how would you go about doing this? I think the first thing I would do is not make this about news coverage per se. There is an argument to be made when crisis happens that the CBC is the one thing that stands there and is there, and that people will turn to because the radio, if you have batteries, will work. It can be reached, and that there's that aspect. So I think I would kind of position it in this way. But then the other thing I would do is maybe not just say we need news media and this is the reason, and try to come up with this level of trust. I would probably invest in some sort of an effort of, I don't like the term social listening because it's been so much co-opted by people thinking you can just do this online with social media or technology, and that's not the case. There needs to be a kind of ground level exercise to hear what people are concerned about and build from there, because I actually think the concerns people have are all shared. It's the kind of top down talking about things in a certain way that is turning people off. But I mean, none of this is easy,
Right.
and I am worried that many of our countries are too far along that scale of escalation and information competition to come back. But ways must be tried.
We're going to leave it there. Alicia Wanless, lost in Miami, heading to somewhere north of Daytona Beach. May you drive safely and not be overtaken by cars without mufflers. Folks, we're going to be back. We're going to be back next week. We have some cool guests lined up. We're going to do some stuff in advance of the Principles First Summit. Holly's going to be back. And you'll be there and I'll be there. And, in the meantime, keep the faith, pray with a raised fist, and, uh, make sure you don't take life too seriously. Use exclamation points in your judicial opinions.